Welcome to Cambridge House Live. I'm Bridgitte Anderson and I'm joined by Jeff Berwick, the founder of the Dollar Vigilante. Nice to see you again, Jeff.
You too, Bridgitte.
Let's start off talking about the monetary system. How close do you think we are to the collapse of the system?
I think we're so close that if you're not prepared for a collapse, that you're crazy. I think you have to, it's better to be 2 years early than a day too late when this sort of systems collapse. And there's been so many things happening. I can't believe that most people don't realize what's going on.
Well, walk us through some of that evidence that you're seeing.
Yeah, for example, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, just came out 2 weeks ago and said that there's going to be some sort of collapse. This is the IMF. This isn't, some guy on a blog. And they said, well, there's going to have to be some sort of financial repression. And they used the word repression. And they said it'll probably be some sort of sovereign debt collapse, which will collapse the entire financial monetary system. And they called it an inflationary surprise. It's just going to be a surprise of inflation. So it's very clear what's going on right now. If you're paying attention at all, this whole Goldilocks recovery or green shoots and all the things that all those criminals like Ben Bernanke talk about is...
You don't believe that this economy or the U.S. economy is in recovery?
No. There's more than 50 million people on food stamps in the U.S. 1 in 4 children in the U.S. are on food stamps. There's 11 states in the U.S. that have more people on unemployment than have jobs, or on welfare than have jobs. It's very clear. This is very typical when you have a Keynesian, socialist, fascist government that they just continue to print money, and that actually fools people. So what's happened since 2008 is they just printed a lot of money. George Soros said in 2009, and I don't really agree with him on a lot of things, but I agree with him on this one thing. He said the financial system collapsed in 2009, and the only way it's being kept alive is by printing money. And you're looking at, in the US now, quantitative easing until infinity.
It's tapering, but you say it's
Tapering.
You're not buying into that?
Oh, tapering. That's so ridiculous. What they're saying is, oh, well, we're going to continue to print money, like $1 trillion a year, but we're going to taper it down to $950 billion per year. It's ridiculous. I can't believe anyone falls for any of that.
Well, what do you think the impact would be if quantitative easing stopped altogether then?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because if they really stop printing money with the amount of debt of the U.S. government, which is now $17 trillion, the entire financial system would collapse, because there's no way to even pay the interest on that debt. If you think about it, $17 trillion. So if the interest rate were allowed to go to a normal market level, which they don't do because they price fix, because they're all criminals, but if it were to go to 10%, that'd be $1.7 trillion per year in interest payments alone. That's almost the entire budget of the US government. So they cannot allow that to happen. They're going to continue to print money until enough people figure out what's going on, and a lot of people are going to get hurt. But if you're smart, you'll be okay.
And I'm sure you've heard this before. You've been told you've got extremist views. How would you respond to people like that?
I remember we had this conversation a year ago, and you asked the exact same question.
So I'm asking you
yes.
again.
I don't find my beliefs to be extreme. I just believe what I'm seeing. I say what I'm seeing. The fact that most people don't talk about these things, I think it's a form of normalcy bias. And what that means is that they haven't seen a massive currency collapse in their lifetime, and they're unwilling to even take the idea and think about that idea, because and as well, they also a lot of people want to believe that nothing's going to change ever. But
so given your beliefs on the monetary system, how do you approach investing then?
It's mostly hard assets, anything outside of the financial system. So gold, silver. I do speculate in a lot of these companies, and I think it's a great time to be speculating in these companies. Also Bitcoin. Last time I was here, I think we talked about Bitcoin.
We did.
I believe it was $35 at that time. It's now $900.
We are seeing some regulation or some restrictions by government, though, on Bitcoin. How far do you think that's going to go?
Well, they can't actually shut down Bitcoin. Government is just the mafia. The only difference between government and mafia is size.
But don't you think that there needs to be some regulation? And I know I've asked you this before, but I'm asking you again because I think there's a lot of people out there that say, there need to be some parameters, some goalposts in place to protect investors as well.
I understand what you're saying, and what you're saying is that people need some sort of security in something, and that's fine, and the free market can supply that. But to actually get the government involved, which is just guns and violence, is a terrible way to do it. So what I'm expecting is a lot of Bitcoin entrepreneurs and companies, and they're sprouting up all over the world, and they'll come up with solutions. There'll be Bitcoin insurance companies, but to regulate, when you say regulate, what that means is you give people control and power and a monopoly on force, and you say, go in and actually force people with guns to do things. That's a really immoral way of thinking.
Well, I don't think I was suggesting using guns for regulation of Bitcoins.
Is.
Well, I was talking about policy, not about guns. But when
what
it comes
is policy?
Well, it's certainly not guns. It would be policy and rules and regulations in place to help.
Which is backed by guns.
Okay, we're going to leave that part of it alone because we're going to disagree on that. But I want to ask you what you see the future of Bitcoins then. I mean, already the first ATM is right here in Vancouver. So do you see more of that where it'll be more of a consumer-based commodity, or is that going to be, do you think it's still going to stay kind of where it is now?
Oh no, I think the future is very bright for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not just money. It's not just a digital currency. It's an idea. It's freedom. It's not controlled by a central bank. It's not controlled by a government.
And do you think there's a risk, though, because of its growth, its popularity, that there could be that the government and the banks are going to get in there anyway? Or do you see that it's impenetrable somehow?
Well, they can't stop it because there is no Bitcoin place. There's no Bitcoin office. So they can't just run in with their usual SWAT teams and bust it down. It's actually all over the internet. So they can't stop Bitcoin itself. They can make all their usual rules and use their guns to stop people from using it. But I don't think that will even work at this point.
I want to talk to you a little bit about real estate, something that we've talked about in the past. Obviously, you're still involved in Galt's Gulch, and so that is a place in Chile where there's a community that's being built. But looking at real estate prices, I mean, do you have the same feeling that you did about real estate prices when we talked a year ago? Do you still see that it's not sustainable where things are at now?
Well, I think the whole world, if you look at the whole world, every single area is different. However, I think Canada is going to have a major collapse in the next 12 to 24 months in real estate. I'm seeing all kinds of signs of it. If you're looking at what's going on with the banks, the Canadian banks are as leveraged as the U.S. government, U.S. banks were leveraged in 2006.
So are you talking about a bubble bursting like it did in some areas in the United States?
Yes.
And do you see that across Canada, or you're talking Vancouver?
It's
Toronto?
really difficult to say. Vancouver's got a different ecosystem. A lot of Asians really like Vancouver, so maybe that will survive somewhat. Whistler's already, properties in Whistler have already gone down 50% in some areas. Quebec is just imploding right now if you're paying attention to what's going on. So it's going to be interesting. I'd definitely be shorting Canadian banks right now.
Have you changed your approach at all in the last several years, given some of the market conditions and some of the things that you see going on?
Not really, no. I've always sort of been along the lines that the fiat currencies are going to collapse. The US dollar will collapse. The Canadian dollar is not backed by anything except for the US dollar. The Canadian Bank of Canada sold all their gold in the 1980s. 90% of trade in Canada is with the US. So I think almost all the fiat currencies are going to implode in the next 5 to 10 years, or maybe sooner. And I've always said to get into hard assets, gold, silver, and Bitcoin now.
All right, well, always a pleasure, Jeff. Thanks very much.
Thank you.